Hi and welcome to Poly Originals with Fiona Abel-Smith. Today I thought we'd have a bit of a fun tutorial just doing a covered pen. I'm going to do something a little bit like this, but obviously loads of other designs are available, and I think I do mine just a little bit differently from other people, just in the very beginning bit, and I'll show you what I mean. To follow today's tutorial we don't need very much in the way of equipment at all. We're going to have a tissue blade, which we do need to cut thin slices. We're going to have a selection of knitting needles, and I'll come on to these in a minute. Now I've got two 4mm knitting needles. This one's a nice long one, and then this one's the short double-ended stubby one. And then I've also got a 3mm knitting needle. And these may suit you, but you may need to get different sizes, and again I'll come on to that in just a moment. You need some corrugated card that we're going to cook our pens on when we're finished. Some form of liquid clay. All the different makes are fine depending on which brand you're using. I've also got a tile underneath here which we're going to cook our pen on. And right at the bottom here, see this grid square? This is a laminated inch square measuring sheet that I'll be using to move things around on, and just to give me a bit of a guide when I'm doing things. The main place where I differ, I believe, from how other people generally do their pens is the type of pen I use. All you need for the technique I'm going to show you is the sort of pen where the nib is removable. And now I'll come on to why. When I was first introduced to polymer clay about 12 years ago by a very good friend of mine, Abel-Smith, thank you Ange, one of the things she showed us how to do was to do cane work, and as soon as she showed it to us I fell in love with it. And then another friend, Chris Healy, showed us how to do pencils in polymer clay. And my one drawback, I'd have to say, with pencils, although they are beautiful and I love them, is the fact you sharpen them and you actually lose the polymer clay. So I thought, pens are much better thing to do than pencils. But my problem was I couldn't find the right sort of pen. I looked online, looked at all the tutorials, realised that, as people say, that some of the pens melt in the oven. You have to have a particular type of pen. And I tried lots of the ones I had around the house, and again, nothing left. All I had was loads of burnt out or melted plastic bits, and I ended up with loads of inserts. So I'm sitting there with all these inserts thinking, okay, now what do I do? And suddenly thought, hang on a minute, I have scrap clay, I can make my own pen bits and actually fit the inserts in. So that is what I'm going to show you how to do today. For me it was a game changer, and hopefully it will be for you as well if you ever have problem getting the sort of pens where you can put polymer around them and bake them in the oven, because these ones you just make your own carcass. So what I discovered, and this goes back to the knitting needles, was that the important bit I needed to measure, which was, see, let me go put it right up to the camera. Can you see the bit where it goes in? So let me put my finger in front of it so you can see. So where it goes in, this bit is the bit you need to measure, and this bit tends to be slightly wider than the rest of the pen base, but narrower than the nib bit that sticks proud of the pen. And what I've worked out when I measured it is that it is more or less perfectly 4mm. So that is why I use a 4mm knitting needle. Now this one has been used over the years quite a lot, so it's very raggedy. It also had plastic bits on the end, so I had to chop the ends off. So if you're doing that, obviously make sure it's a knitting needle you're never going to want to use again. Luckily I'm not a knitter, so it wasn't a problem for me. And all I then did was get myself some scrap clay. So I put my scrap clay down on a measuring sheet, and I worked out roughly the size I needed. So the pen nib was here, so I worked out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Give myself 5.5 inches. So I just use my tissue blade to start me off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5. And then I just cut myself the top bit nice and straight. And then take your knitting needle, and what you need to do is you need to sort of what I call nibble up. So just pull up this little bit of clay all the way along the edge till it starts to sit around the knitting needle. And what you're trying to do is to make sure the clay sticks exactly next to the knitting needle, no air trapped at all, it's exactly the right circumference. And then you just pull it around once till it hits the clay. So I turn that around that way so you can see it properly. You can see there where it's just hit once. Then take your tissue blade, or if you prefer, and I think it was easy to just make it easier, I'm going to use a craft knife. Literally just run your craft knife along the join where those two meets. So as you can see, you need very little scrap clay. In fact, that piece would probably be enough to do me 3 inserts for my pens. And then all you do is, again, with your fingers, just very, very gently, let me pull this right up to the camera so you can see. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to push that layer of clay into the other bit. Now I'm not pushing too hard, and I'm making sure I'm not creating too much of a ridge or too much in the way of finger marks. And then when it's flat on your surface, just give it a roll. I'm going to take the measuring sheet away because it's easier to roll it without. Now I'm just rolling very gently here. All I'm doing is trying to make sure I've got a nice round part where that join was. Don't worry too much because of course we're going to cover it in clay. And what I always do is look straight down the barrel to check that the clay is nice and even both ends, and I haven't moved my clay out from the central position. If it's become slightly pushed out at the end, I'll just use my thumbnail to push it back in. And there we go. But one of the problems I did have, and what I've learnt from, because this was about 12 years ago that I started doing this, is that I used to bake these on this knitting needle, hence the fact that these knitting needles are so badly scratched and marked, because I needed pliers to get them off. But what I've discovered since, an easier way to do it, is very gently, just twist your clay until you feel it starting to move from the knitting needle underneath. Take your time, don't rush, and if you've got nice clean knitting needles, yours should move a lot more quickly than this one does, because mine are so used, it's clinging onto all these scratches under there. And then you can twist, so I'm just twisting, I'm holding on to it ever so gently, just twisting this end until you twist it completely off the needle. And what you should end up with is a lovely tube, just the right thickness and width to fit your pen into. To make sure that that bakes straight, we're going to take that thinner needle, which was a 3mm needle, and put that all the way through. So there it is on my 3mm knitting needle. So we're going to bake that on a piece of card, on top of a tile, for however long the manufacturers say. So for me, 30 minutes. And here it is baked, all ready to go, all ready to cover. So again, when I first started, because I was new to polymer clay and I didn't have all the equipment and all the tools, I used to cover mine in a very thin layer of PVA glue. But now, of course, I have got liquid clay, so I'll just take a little bit of liquid clay, hardly any, just dab it along, and then just with my fingers rub it all over the outside of that, just to make sure that any pattern we put on the top and any design is going to stick nicely to it. Now there are a few more tips to doing this, so if you think you've got all the tips by now and you can turn off and look at something else, you might want to stay just for a little bit longer so I can show you the rest of how I make this into a perfect fitting for the pen you're going to do, because there are a couple more tips. So put that to one side. Now those of you who've seen my videos will probably know that I've got a couple of other videos here for doing the basics. So I've got a video on doing a skinner blend. So I'm going to work on the basis that you either know how to do a skinner blend, or if you don't, you'll nip across and look at either mine or one of the other tutorials. But what I've got here is a skinner blend I prepared earlier, because we are doing, as I mentioned earlier, this pen, and as you can see here, this is the skinner blend I used from this pen, so I had enough to do more than one pen. So I'm just going to take our pen case, sit it somewhere on the skinner blend, which I think will look nice, and exactly the same as we did previously, I'm just going to use this to wrap round. One thing I would say though with this skinner blend, I have done this very many times through the pasta machine, so I haven't got any of that different coloration that goes through the stripes when you pick it up. So I've probably put this through about 30 times, and there is a reason for doing that when you're covering things like the pens, which I'll come on to in a second. So all I'm going to do, take this insert and fold the clay around, and exactly the same as we did on the knitting needle, I'm going to pull it all the way around until it meets, and then I'm going to unwind it, and hopefully I will see that little line where I need to cut. Now I'm actually going to cut just inside it, so just short of where you think you would need to be according to that line, and again there is a reason for that. I'm going to take the excess off either end just at the moment, just to give me something to work with or to make it easier. And now I can pull that round, but because I made it slightly shorter, what you should find is that there's no overlap, that where you put those two bits up, the edges are slightly apart, and you want that when you're doing a skinner blend, because you don't want, particularly if you haven't put it through the pasta machine loads of times, so you haven't got that lovely blend, you want to be able to have a really smooth, good seam, and that's particularly important if you're using any of the pearlised colours, which all of the brands do, because the pearlised ones, as we know, the mica powders will sit slightly uppermost depending on how you've put it together, and you don't want that line running the whole length down. Now we're going to go back to our short knitting needle, and with the short knitting needle I'm just going to literally roll either side of my clay join until it all comes together in one smooth blend. Because I left that little gap in between, it means you can push those colours together, and when you then roll it, you will get a lovely blend without being able to see the seam at all. So I'm just going to wipe with a dry tissue across my tile to make sure I've got no little bits of clay, and have a good look at my hands to make sure I've got no little bits of clay on my hands. And once I'm happy that I'm okay with that, I will just start giving it a roll. And that knitting needle, which is the next tip, that 4mm knitting needle, so the same size as the barrel we made, I'm just going to slip inside the barrel, and we can then use that to create ourselves a nice slope at this end which will fit round the top of the pen. So I'm just pushing and pulling with my fingers, creating a nice little slope there. We don't need to be absolutely pristine at this stage, because we are going to add some decoration onto this, but do make sure when you're working on it that you always keep the clay nice and centrally around the needle. Because of course with the pens you buy, you'd already have this bit of cone shaping at the end here already done, but because we're creating our own, we need to make that shape ourselves. So spend a little time, finesse that, and on the other end you just want to fill over and create a nice smooth blunt end. But you can do whatever design you want on the end, however you would normally do your pens. Okay, I'm just giving it a bit more of a roll. So that effectively is the pen covered, and we'll say we'll do a bit more to that in a moment because we'll add some decoration on it, but those are the basics. So to decorate our pen, I'm going to make a rose cane, and I'll show you how to do that, and then I'm also going to add some little leaf canes. Now I'm not going to show you the leaf canes in this tutorial because it would be too long a tutorial, and besides which there are loads of tutorials online to show you how to do some little leaves. So I've got some I prepared earlier for that, so I'll just add them in, but I will show you how to do the rose cane. And one of the main reasons I'm doing this is because there is a video tutorial of me doing a rose cane on the British Polymer Clay Guild's YouTube website, and it's the first time I ever did a video, and whilst the video itself is fine, the volume, the sound on it is atrocious, and lots of people said they couldn't hear me, sadly. So for all of those of you who watched that video and couldn't hear me, I'm going to do the same again, so hopefully this time you'll be able to hear it. So what I've done is I've put together colours for a skinner blend. So I've gone white, sort of lilac-y pink colour, and then I've added some deep purple. And because I want it to be more purpley than this lilac colour, I've actually added the purple all the way just along the top. And as with most skinner blends, what I'm going to do with this one, say if you're not sure how to do skinner blend, I have done a tutorial on how I do mine. I'm just folding it like that, fold first through the pasta machine, and I'll bring you back when we've got to the stage that that blend is done. Okay, so my skinner blend is done, so I'm just going to chop this into half roughly. Lay one side on top of the other and then put it back through my pasta machine. I'm going to put the white end through first, so I'm going to give my pasta machine a couple of turns round in the normal direction just to clear any clay that sort of got stuck underneath. And then, because I know my machine's a very good machine, I'm going straight down to the thinnest setting on my machine. But if you're not sure about your machine, then go down one setting at a time all the way down. And each time you change setting, just turn that handle a couple of times, and if there is any clay stuck underneath, it should help clear it and not get it stuck onto your clay. So I'll come back when I've done that. Okay, so here's my nice long thin strip of polymer clay. So I'm going to concertina this from one end to the other, and I'm going to start with the white end and just literally fold it backwards and forwards on itself. This is one of the videos, or the this is one of the demonstrations we do an awful lot for the British Polymer Clay Guild when we're up at the National Exhibition Centre in the UK, and I've probably done a rose cane tutorial for people watching literally hundreds and hundreds of times. Because of that, I've made a little formula for myself so that I can talk and make the cane at the same time, and that is what I'll show you today. So all I'm doing is concertinaing backwards and forwards. Normally when I'm at the NEC I do this in about 30 seconds flat, so it's quite nice for me today to spend a bit of time and make sure that I haven't got any air trapped in all those folds and all those concertinas. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this round off the edges just a fraction, because I want to make it more of a round cane than a square one. If you do find you've got any air trapped, I don't think that is actually, but if you did, just poke it with your knife or with a needle to make sure any air's gone. And I have got myself a nice thin sheet of that same purple. It's on setting number 6 at the moment, but I'm going to put it down to a very thin setting. So I've just been using number 9 on my machine to get that skin of blend nice and thin, so I'm just going to do the same again. So number 9 on my machine. Oh, if you do that, that's fine, because luckily I've got enough. I can take a piece off there. Just use the tissue blade either side to measure. Cut the bit off the end, and then I'm just going to wrap this round until it reaches. I can see where that's gone down there, so just cut the excess off either with a tissue blade or with a craft knife, and that effectively is our first rose petal. But obviously that's just one, and to make a rose we need several, so we need to now to reduce this, and this is where my formula comes in. So what I tend to do is I tend to pinch in at the end slightly and then give it a roll. I know I'll get wastage on either end. Let me just clear my towel again, but that's fine, because as we've just discovered, in order to make these pens you need lots of scrap clay. And weirdly enough, when I first started doing this, because doing pens was the first thing I did which actually sold when I was doing craft fairs and things, and I did pens before I did anything else using exactly this way of doing them. And back in those days I never had enough scrap clay. Nowadays, like everyone else, I have loads, but don't worry about losing any bit off the end. There are some great products on the market, as most of you know, for reducing your canes and not losing as much, and they are fantastic. I've got some myself, so if you want to use those, please feel free, and there are loads of tutorials on how to use those as well. But for what we're doing today, I'm not overly bothered. So what I'm going to do now is just get to my measuring sheet. And what I'm looking for is a piece that's about 6 inches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, that's just about right. So I'm going to chop off the end, make sure I've got one neat bit. And then I'm going to chop, so I've got 6 inches in length, I'm going to chop 3 segments. So 1, 2, 3. So they are my big outer petals. Then I'm going to remove the measuring sheet, because I find it much easier to roll on a tile than I do on a plastic sheet. And again, I want exactly the same, this to be about 6 inches. Just pushing that down. And then I'm going to chop off 3 again. So easy so far. Make it length of 6, chop off 3, length of 6, chop off 3. I'm not going to worry about the distortion on that end. I'm just going to chop 1, 2, 3. There we go, those are the middle bits. And then this last one, I just want to be about 4 or 5 inches in length. Depends on how much you've got, because you don't want to go too small with your pieces. So let's do it probably to about there and see what we've got. So yes, this will be 4. So 1, 2, 3, and those will be my 3 small petals, and then it leaves me with one piece to put on the inside. So this one piece, I'm going to chop again this piece to about 1 inch, and then this piece is going to be the middle swell. So I'm not bothered about the fact there's distortion at one end from the other. I'm just going to take my thumb, and with my thumb press one end only flat on your measuring sheet, and take a roller and roll that really quite thin. So if you can see there, one end's very thin and one end's a lot thicker. And then from the thin end you simply roll up, because most roses, if you look carefully, the inner petals are so tightly packed they look a bit like a swirl. So that's just creating a swirl in the middle of our rose. So that's the middle of the rose, so we'll put that to one side, and then we'll start dealing with our petals. Now when I'm doing this, you've got 1 inch worth of petal here, and I always work out which colour I want to have towards me when I start. So I'm going to put the white colour towards me, and I'm simply going to press in with my thumbs and fingers, then turn the other way up, because you'd be amazed how often, even in just that 1 inch worth of cane, the cane can be distorted from one end to the other. So if you always turn it like that, upside down, then you know you're going to end up with a properly proportioned or properly, you see that one went, so I know now I need to twist it that way. If I hadn't done top to bottom, then I'd gone the whole way down, and I'd have ended up, when I was putting my rows together, with the patterns being slightly different from top to bottom. So same again, all the way down, and then last but not least, the little small ones, always the white to me. 1, 2, 3. And the last thing I need to do, so those are my 3 small ones, those are my 3 medium ones, and these are my 3 large ones. Now I know from experience, I like a rose cane to look like all the outer petal, the large outer petals go the whole way around the cane. So I'm going to take these, I'm going to press them down on my measuring sheet, and I'm going to pull the edges of that petal really quite long, and I'm going to just repeat that with all 3 of those pieces. There we go, and those are all the pieces of our cane ready to go. So to put the cane together, the thing to remember about rose is that every petal overlaps the preceding petal. So find the outer part of your middle spiral and decide which colour you're going to have going outwards. I'm going to have the white part going outwards, so the darker pink is going towards the middle, and simply put it on and press it round. And then just repeat going up, so the white bit out towards me, push it on, press it round. If you find that this bit's getting too long, then you simply squidge it shorter. And that is the bit that tends to happen. You'll find as you go around the sizes, the bit you're working on does get longer, but that's fine. As I say, just, did I put that one the wrong way around? I did. So I'm just going to, because I'm talking and not concentrating. Okay, let's pick that up, put that the right way around. There we go. And then start putting these around. Don't worry as well where the thin outer layer looks as though it's coming through. That won't show up in the finished piece, because you're always going to have 2 layers effectively next to each other of the purple, so don't worry about that. That's my second middle piece, and then we're going to do my third middle. Oh, I've done it again, haven't I? Right, let's take that off, put him the right way around, and the last one. And now we're going to press it quite a lot shorter, because these outer ones are quite a lot smaller. So I'm literally going to press with my fingers down, because you don't worry about what the outside or the either end of your cane looks like. It's just what's on the inside that's important. That one goes around there, and hopefully this one should go all the way around. That's the finished rose cane. And then of course you get that moment of truth when you cut through the middle, which is always the worry when you're doing the big shows. And there you have your rose cane. So I'm only going to take this one small piece at the moment, because what I need to do obviously is reduce this quite a bit to make it the right size to go on our pen, and this other bit I'll put to one side and keep that one for later when I can either reduce it or not. And I'm going to reduce this one literally by pushing into it with my hands. Now I'm not going to roll it flat, because I don't want a completely round rose for what I'm doing. If you did want to, that's absolutely fine, and then just reduce your rose cane however you want. But to put round the pen we're doing today, I want some uneven pieces. I want every little rose slice that I take to look slightly different, so I'm not worried at all about making a round shape. So I'm literally just pushing with my fingers and reducing it. And now we can start putting our pen together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my tissue blade and just take 5 thin slices from this cane. So I'm going to slice and roll, because as I say, I'm quite happy with every slice being slightly different. Okay, so there are 5 slices, and what I can do now is, because I want them all to be slightly different, you can actually manipulate the cane at this point. So I'm just pulling these out. I'm going to make the ends a little bit flatter to make it easier where it sits on the pen, and that way as well you can make sure that each of these slices looks ever so slightly different. Just very gently with your fingers, just pulling out. So that's 2 done. Particularly if you find you've got a bit that's quite thick, gives you a chance to really pull it out, because of course we're going to push this clay into the background Skinner blend we had there. Okay, so I finished putting all the little leaves on my pen. Now obviously you can leave it like that if you want to, and then just have a very tactile pen, but I'm working on the basis I'm going to push these into the background. So I'm going to keep this short 4-inch knitting needle inside the top of the pen so I don't press down on the hole and don't lose that. And I'm just with my thumbs going to press down all the way around the edges of the pieces I've pressed in, and pressing down the edges just gives it that slight edge and contains it a little bit when you start rolling the pattern inwards. So I'm just literally pressing them in with my thumb. Whenever you're doing finishing work on something like this, my recommendation would be take your time. The longer you spend making sure this is all nice and pristine and exactly how you want it, the less time you're going to have to spend sanding and polishing. And if you're anything like me, I'm not a huge, whilst I'll do it, I'm not a huge fan of sanding. I would rather save myself the time if I could. So I have cleaned my hands before I did this. I've also cleaned the tile to make sure I've got, just do a last little push, yes, nothing there. So when you're happy and you've done all of that, then start rolling again with your hands. And what you're trying to do is you're going to roll all this pattern into the background whilst keeping, so apologies about the noise, obviously it's the rolling pin hitting the tile, but we want that to happen because we want it to stay in there. So I'm going to concentrate a bit on the nib as well, and you're just rolling the pattern until it creates a nice smooth finish on your pen. Pick it up and have a really good look at it. Make sure there's no areas such as here. I can see here I've got a slight groove, so I'll go back, because it's things like that which you don't necessarily notice at this stage, which then cause real problems when you're trying to sand. I've got another little one here, so I'm going to press down on that. And when you've got it so you think it's roughly okay, I'm not spending too much time on the top or the bottom at the moment, get yourself your flat tile that you baked your piece on earlier. Make sure it's nice and clean, and if you turn it upside down you can use that to roll across the top of your pen, and that gives you a really nice flat finish. Okay, again, pick it up, make sure your hands are clean, have a really good inspection, make sure it's as good as it's going to get, hardly any lines. I've still got a little bit here. Let's have another look. Yeah, that's better. Because say I'm really trying to make sure I don't have to do any sanding whatsoever, or say the minimum anyway. Make sure the ends nicely done, and then spend a bit of time on the piece where the nib is. They look down every so often to check that it's nice and central in the clay. Just create yourself a nice place where the nib's going to sit, and when you're completely happy and it's ready to go in the oven, you can very gently twist out the knitting needle you've had in place, and take your corrugated card again, rest your pen on it and bake. So when it comes out of the oven, I've just then sanded and polished this one, and you just make sure that your nib fits straight in. And the great thing about them, not only do you make your own pen casing, so you can make as many as you like, but of course when that pen's finished and done with, you just replace it, put another pen in. So that was my tutorial on how to cover pens by making the inserts yourself rather than having to buy the ready-made inserts. As I say, it works with any pen at all, as long as it's the sort of pen you can take the nib out of. That's the only thing with this one. Other than that, I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed the rose cane tutorial as well. If you did, I've got a site, there's my website, fionaabel-smith.co.uk. I've put the details in the link at the bottom, and also I've got quite a few tutorials for sale on Etsy. And if you like the video and haven't yet subscribed to me, please do subscribe, and then you'll get notified when I put my next videos out. Thank you for spending time with me today. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll say bye for now. Bye.